How you doing? This is Dr. Malik Rahim, and I want to go over chapter two, which is basically in our assessment class, and then just trying to talk about chapter two and kind of give a quick overview and a rundown on chapter two. The title is Ethical, Legal, and Professional Issues in Assessments, and we're going to briefly go over this, and we're going to have a review. Then on Monday, we're going to talk about chapter one and chapter two, kind of go over or do another overview, and then kind of talk about some different type of assessments. Okay. Um, I'll encourage you to watch this at the end because potentially we can have some questions. When you look at the ethical issues in assessment, the first thing you got to do is look at the code of ethics. And the easiest way to look at the code of ethics is two on the ACA Code of Ethics, American Council Association, and the APA, American Psychological Code of Ethics, and then review them. And real quickly, is the main thing is making sure you choose the appropriate instrument when you're going to do an assessment or testing. And the most appropriate way to do this is if you're going to be doing screening or testing for a personality disorder, make sure you get the right assessments. If you're going to be doing an IQ test, or if you're going to be doing an emotional test, or if you're going to be doing a, um, a test in like a screening, like Beck Depression Inventory or Beck Suicidal Screen or something like that. So it's very important that you choose the right instrument to assess what you think, what you're going to be doing. Okay. Competence. Make sure that you're competent and well versed in the assessment that you're going to be doing. You understand what is going to be assessing. You understand how to score it. You know how to interpret the scores. Those are some of the most important things. Make sure you keep up with confidentiality, that you're following HIPAA or FERPA laws, depending on which governing body that is over you at the time. Um, Cross cultural sensitivity, make sure that you understand how a person's culture might be caught up in pathology when doing these assessments. So to make sure that the assessments you are using have taken special strides to make sure that there is no issues with cross cultural issues. Make sure the client knows what the assessment is going to be doing, how it's going to be used, and so they get basically have an informed consent when they actually go ahead and decide that yes, I'm going to do this assessment. I know what it's about. I know what it's going to do. I know what the scores are going to mean. I know what you're trying to measure. So those are some things. There could be a sense of invasion of privacy, and make sure you take care of that when you're doing your assessment, because you're going to be more than likely doing asking questions and probing into certain parts of the life that your client may not necessarily be ready for. But these are some of the things that you're going to have to take in consideration when you're doing assessment and the ethical issues dealing with it. Proper diagnosis. Make sure that you get the proper diagnosis, and one of the best ways is make sure you use the appropriate instruments and you score properly. The release of test data, when can it be released, how should it be released, and to whom it should be released to. The test administration, to make sure that there is a sense of privacy and comfort in the testing, and making sure that your client is have a sense of confidentiality with the test administration, and making sure that proper time is given for the test to be administered. Test security, make sure that it's not easily hacked, make sure the confidentiality cannot be easily taken over and breached in any particular way. And test scoring and interpretation, make sure that the scored properly and it is interpreted properly, and make sure that you're competent, that you know how to interpret the scores, and to give the client the information that they need when it comes to um, the scoring. When you choose appropriate instruments, it's very important that you know what you're planning on screening for or testing for, and you choose the instruments that's going to have some validity and reliability based off of you're actually measuring what you're saying you're trying to measure. Okay. Test worthiness is making sure that there's a sense of construct and content validity to your test, and making sure that the test is properly administered, and that it is has some foundations when it comes to actually administer the test, making sure that you're competent. Um, Sometimes you have individuals who are so enthused in doing the test that they're not competent in either scoring the test, administering the test, or interpreting the test. But make sure that you've received the proper training for the test and instruments that you're going to be using to assess your client. Tests can be administered, scored, and interpreted by responsible non-psychologists. Level A. Level B tests are tests that require knowledge of construction, use, and appropriate advanced coursework in psychology and related courses. And test C, tests that require an advanced psychology degree or license and advanced training, supervised experience in the particular test. And after this course, after you graduate, many of you will be eligible to do level C um, um, as tests and assessments. Confidentiality, when to break it. If a client is in danger of harming himself or herself or someone else, the client is in danger of harming themselves or someone else. That's the quickest way to make sure you're going to break it. If they give you the impression that they might harm themselves or someone else, is appropriate for you to break confidentiality. If a client is a minor or is legally incompetent and the law states that the parent or guardians have a right to information about that person, it's very important that you break confidentiality. If a person asks you to break confidentiality, and to defend yourself against charges filed by a client, if you are asked by the court to break confidentiality and privilege communication does not exist, um, if you're subpoenaed, um, you can break confidentiality to reveal information about your client to clerical help, colleagues, or supervisors that's going to benefit the client. So if you're getting consultation or you're getting clinical supervision, it's okay to reveal certain information about your client to make sure that you're getting the full benefit of that consultation or that clinical supervision to be able to benefit your client. When you have a written agreement from your client to reveal information to specific sources, and that goes back into when your client asks you to. But if your client signs a release of information for, let's say, a job, and it's a particular person on a job or a particular job, you are authorized to release information. Making sure that there's cross-cultural sensitivity, no potential biases of assessment procedures when selecting, administering, and interpreting. A lot of the older assessments were normed on white males because college students were the easiest, most direct way of norming some of these assessments and testings from years past. And some of them still have a lot of cultural biases. And you got to understand what kind of cultural bias that these assessments or tests might have. Obtaining informed consent, invasion of privacy. All tests do this. Minimized by obtaining informed consent. Proper diagnosis. Be aware of repercussions of the diagnosis. It can make your client very in a box and kind of pigeonhole them into certain things, and it can have ramifications given the diagnosis. So be aware of those ramifications. Release of test data only release to individuals who have a right to the data and won't misuse it. Use signed release forms from your client. The test administration properly administer as they were standardized. This is a very important picture. How important are ethics in today's society? And you see the one individual is kind of answering the questions, and everybody else is kind of looking at over their shoulder and at their paper to kind of get the answers, and going to use their answers as their own, and kind of, kind of like a thing about like, is ethics really important? Well, according to this picture, it can be very much so, because um, if you don't have ethics, then a lot of things break down. Test security. Keep integrity of the test content. Scoring and interpretation. When scoring and interpreting, understand limitations of test info. The standards for responsible test practices. Standards of qualification of test users. Responsibility of the users of standardized tests. Standards for multicultural assessment. Code of fair testing practices. Right and responsibility of test takers. Standards for educational and psychological tests. Competencies for testing in school counseling, mental health counseling, marriage, couples, and family counseling, career counseling, and substance abuse counseling. Making ethical decisions. Problem solving model is first, you want to identify the problem. Then you want to identify potential issues involved in the problem. Review relevant ethical guidelines. Know relevant laws and regulations of where you are at. Obtain consultation. It's always good to get consultation and supervision. Consider possible courses of action, and you can do this with your consultation. List consequences of various decisions, and again, you can do this with the consultation, and decide best course of action. The ethical, moral, and cognitive development affects how one makes a decision. Um, as we develop cognitively, it impacts how we make a decision, because we can think, as our cognition get more advanced, we can think more deeper, have a deeper understanding, and our emotional intelligence grows. Higher level of development related to more complex ethical decision making. FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. This is very important for a lot of us that are going to be going into school counseling. Applies to all schools that receive federal funds. People have right to education records, including test records. And then, of course, you got HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And this is going to be very important for us who are going into clinical mental health. I know some of you all might be planning on going into both, so it's very important that you understand both. Even if you're not going into both, it's very important that you understand both and what the requirements are to make sure you're compliant with both FERPA and HIPAA. Restricts info shared without client consent. Allows clients access to their records except for process notes and used in counseling. Privileged communication laws. Licensed professional have the right to keep info confidential. And Jeffrey versus Redmond. And what Redmond is that it was a case where the police officer, um, when a police officer was the first responder in a call, and when they arrived, um, unfortunately, incidents happened. person was shot and killed. The family sued, and upon the suit, they wanted to get the client, the officer's records. Well, the courts made it to where it's like you can't get those records. Freedom of Information Act allows access to federal records. States have adopted similar laws. Civil Rights Act of 1964 and amendments. Tests used for employment or promotion must be shown to be suitable and valid for the job in question. Americans with Disabilities Act. Accommodations must be made for individuals with disabilities who take tests for employment. Tests must be relevant to job in question. Individual Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. This is very important if you're into school counseling as well, that you got to give equitable access. Children to 3 to 21 suspected of having a disability must be tested at the school's expense. Child Study Team, Individual Education Plan, the IEP. Section 504 Rehabilitation Act. Testing for federally funded programs must be a reflection of individual ability, not disability. Carl Perkins Act of 2016 assures rights of selected disenfranchised groups to access vocational assessment, counseling, and placement for special populations. Some of the professional issues associations, ACA, the American Counseling Association. I would encourage you to get involved and become members. The Association for Assessment and Research in Counseling, Journals, Measurement and Evaluation in Counseling and Development, Counseling Outcome Research and Evaluation, in APA, the Division 5 Evaluation, Measurement and Statistics, their journals, the Psychological Assessment, Psychological Methods. The professional organization created a curriculum standard to ensure adequate training and assessment. Organizations that create curriculum standards, American Psychological Association, National Association of School Psychologists, Council for Accreditation of Counseling and Related Education Programs, also known as CACREP. That's who we are accredited by. Addresses need of accurate assessment for courts, forensic psychologists and forensic evaluators credentialing, counselors for social workers, certification through National Board of Forensic Evaluators, psychologists, board certified in forensic psychology through the American Board for Forensic Psychology. And the common areas for forensic health evaluators. And when it comes to civil, you usually talk about child custody, civil commitment, deprivation of parental rights, divorce mediation. When it comes to criminals, some of the main things you do is the juvenile waiver from juvenile to adult court. That's when you want to have a client petition to be tried as an adult. And what they'll do is come in, how you come in, do an assessment of them, juvenile sentencing, competence to stand trial, competence to be sentenced, competence to waive Miranda rights, insanity defense, and those some of the things. Avoid using one test score in making decisions. Remember, individuals' motivation, intention, and focus will affect scores. Assessment is not a static process, ongoing. People do change. Examine quality and usefulness of assessment and instruments. Remember following points. Assume that all tests hold some biases. I can't emphasize that enough. Be in touch with your own biases and prejudice. Another very, very important thing, because You got to understand what's going on with you before you're ready to help anyone else, and how sometimes your outlook can be impacting the whole dynamic of what you're trying to assess. Only use tests that have been shown to be constructed using sound research procedures, and only tests that have good validity and reliability. Know there are times when it is appropriate to test and times when it is not. Know how to choose good tests that are relevant to the situation at hand. Know how to administer, score, and interpret tests within the cultural context of the client. View assessments as a holistic process. Know and consider the implication that testing may have for the client. Advocate for clients when tests are shown to be biased. Test people humanely during the assessment process. If you have an aversion to assessment procedures and you act on it, then you are not being fair to your client. If clients are to get the most out of counseling, all avenues to increase self-knowledge should be available to them, including assessments. And that will conclude our brief talk on chapter 2. And one of the things that makes chapter 2 so important is one to keep you out of court. Okay. That's one of the things that's very important about chapter 2. Another thing is that you gotta have a code, you gotta have a standard, and a professional standard is essential when you're doing counseling, but it's absolutely essential when you're doing assessment and testing. So that will conclude briefly chapter 2. Like I said, we're going to meet on Monday and we'll be able to go over this stuff, this talk. So in the meantime, sit back, relax, have a nice weekend, and I will see you soon.